I was just interested. Has anyone ever been here to Beijing? Anyone ever visited Beijing? You haven't been yet. I was in Beijing recently. I just went for a walk outside, and the air is so beautifully fresh out there. I hear the traffic going up and down, but it was so beautifully clear. And when I went to Beijing, it was terrible. It was smoky in the fog. Not from the weather. It was from the power stations. And pollution is terrible. So you've got it's lovely out there. Is it always like that? Is it nice and clear? Always. Right. Anyway, so what I thought we would do now is that we will probably do about 30 minutes or so on this one. Then we're going to stop for lunch. So that's what I'm aiming at. We'll have lunch soon after midday. midday. So we'll see how far we go. Then after lunch we will finish off this bit, and then I also want to do a bit on people who might be interested in becoming experts. Okay, so let's start. Now, what I'm doing now is we're going to look at the individual standards that we talked about, standard and the SOP. For those of you writing your SCRs, these are some of the things that I think from a QA side of things you need to be thinking about and concentrating. So important points where QA must be seen. Number one, mission statement. Everyone seems to have the same mission statement, it's just worded differently. But all the different standards that you have, the 10 standards, the 11th one is just QA, but those standards, the mission statement must, if you like, embrace them. It must be sort of inclusive on it. So the QA, they will be looking for evidence that you have developed a mission statement and that you are following it. Still on one. Another QA area you must have in your SCR is evidence that you have involved input from not only staff and students, but stakeholders. In other words, recent graduates, employers, federations, or whatever federation you have employing veterinarians. You must show in your SCR and have evidence in documentation that you have listened to them, and as a result of what people say, you have included. You may have dismissed it. You may have said, no, that's a load of nonsense, we're not going to change. But it doesn't matter. It's the fact that you listened. You are the professional, you make your own mind up, but you must have listened. So it's the listening that's important from a QA perspective. Then, the establishment, the school, must have a plan. You must have a strategic plan. Usually I find it's better on your plan that you put in, you have a SWOT analysis of what you are currently doing, all your activities.
What's the meaning of SWOT?
SWOT, it's I'm just trying to think. It's strengths. It's what you think you're good at.
That's one English.
So the first one is strength. So what you think is particularly good about the vet school of your school. What are your strengths? And then to remember SWOT, it must be it's a self-critical analysis. So the W is your weaknesses. So what you think you are weak at and you really want to improve. And this, of course, is what you do in your SCR anyway, in your different standards. Is what, and you will, when you go through the standards, you will see that. So what are your weaknesses? And as far as the O and T are concerned, what are the opportunities for O? Yeah, well, we think we have a great opportunity to move into this area. We have a good opportunity to expand our number of students. Those are opportunities. And then T is threats. Well, the university could take away all its money, whatever. So their threats will vary. So SWOT is very straightforward to do. And what people sometimes do with SWOT is they actually divide it up. You may have a SWOT for your actual teaching side. You may have a SWOT for all your physical activities and your buildings, etc. On it. So as long as you have a SWOT, sometimes people divide SWOT up into the different areas within. But whatever you do, you will need a SWOT analysis. And I think you will integrate it into your strategic plan. That's a normal way I think would be best to do it on it. And then your strategic plan must have a list of objectives. This is what you would like to be, which fits into SWOT, of course. And a bit of time frame. In other words, how long is it going to take you to get to what you want to do? And indicators. So in other words, an indicator is what is the evidence for that it's working. So that would depend, of course, what the plan was. Operating plan, you have an example, for instance, you want to build a brand new hospital. So that's an objective that you're going to do. You've got an operating plan to build a hospital and the finance. You've got a time frame, you want to do it by 2019. And the indicators are that you've got the first bit of the building up and whatever. So you can understand what I mean. It's written into that. And that is definitely QA. The fact that you've got those things to do and that you are achieving them. Right, still on standard 1. When Easy Vet come, if they find you haven't got a strategic plan, you haven't got a SWOT analysis, that's going to result in a major deficiency, almost certainly, because that's non-compliance with that standard. The other thing they will look out for is that if what you put into your SCR now was exactly what you put 3 years ago. So all you've done is to say, oh well, we did that last year, let's put it in again, and we did that the year before. That does not count as a sufficiently effective strategic plan. Even if you have a meeting to show, well, we still think we're going to do that. But the fact that you've had a meeting and you still have got that plan, fine. But you can't just cut and paste it. It's got to be an ongoing process, and you've got to show evidence from the QA side that you have looked at that and it is progressing. So all that would come under standard 1. Other things that you might put in under standard 1 is that your national, and I understand when I was talking to Madrid people, that you have an internal assessment as well, a national assessment coming as well. You'll have to do another SCR or whatever. And that would count as external QA for sure. And so you must write that into standard 1, that you have such a thing. What is the time frame of it? What are they going to do? What are the results in the past visitations from this group, this national group? When we went through standard 1 just now, we looked at it, and you noticed there were different substandards, and we looked at some of them. We didn't have time to go through every one in detail, but you see them there. Now, the QA expert will be helping with this chapter, because they're not all QA, but examples I think of are in it when you look at them, and this is almost referring back now to it, is a policy for QA, design and approval of programs, learning resources and student support. And this is areas that link with standard 11. These are things that will come back into, have you got this QA in standard number 1. So it refers, you can see how these things interrelate with each other all the time. It doesn't really matter if you're repeating things at all, because they are integrated within each other. Okay, so standard 1 is obviously important, and I've produced some of those, what I think are the important QA things you need to be aware of. Standard 2 finances. I think this, I find difficult to evaluate standard 2 from a QA perspective, because if you read EasyVet SOP, the Uppsala SOP, it just gives descriptions of it. It doesn't really fit in what a QA person would call a PDCA cycle. QA people are fully aware, I guess, or they should be, of a PDCA cycle, because QA people love this. Enqua love PDCA cycles. And it's a quite sensible thing if you think about it. It's basic, but basically they would say, right, what are your plans? Are you doing it? Evidence that you're doing it. You're checking it to see if it actually happened, and if it didn't happen, you're acting on it. This is this perfect circle thing. Now, it's difficult with finances because finances vary from school to school to school to school. You can't do it, but whatever your school is, you will have, obviously, to explain the finances. It may be coming because you're a separate school, it may be coming from the university and you're given a sum of money. Is the sum of money, how is it distributed in the different departments? What about your clinical income? What about your research income? All these will vary. They're bound to. All I'm really saying is that once you write that chapter in what is the finances of your school, just see if you can find a PDCA cycle of things that might happen. Let's take an example of clinical income. And I'll give an example in the UK, Edinburgh Veterinary School. Edinburgh Veterinary School, I don't know if any of you have recently visited there, have got the most fantastic new hospital. Amazing. We're very jealous. But that is, in the English word, predicated, which means dependent on clinical income, income from overseas students, which are American. So Edinburgh takes in, it's AVMA accredited, it takes in a large number of American graduates who come in having done their first degree in America, and they will come in for 4 years at Edinburgh, and they pay a lot of money. And they built this hospital dependent on these American students coming all the time. Now, in Bristol, we don't take any American students, because we've got enough of our own students, thank you. I think it's a bit of a gamble, because you can imagine the finances. They plan to build this hospital, they do it, they've done it. Suppose, for some reason, I don't know, there is a new Trump university that will just feed vet schools. No, I'm laughing, aren't I? But you can understand the threat, is that if they, for any reason, dropped that, then that is a big threat to them. They have to pay that money back. So that's an example, if you like, of some of the bits that have to be put in, and it will vary from school to school. So the Bristol SCR will be totally different on finances than an Edinburgh SCR, because we're not dependent on overseas income. So, in the finances from the QA, just make sure that you look at some of the threats and some of where your finances come from, and you persuade to have, if you like, a plan B, which is important. I think I do mention that. Allocation of funds. So from QA perspective, how is this money divided up? So quality assurance will want to know that there is a fair review of this money coming in, and that there is sufficient of it to meet the teaching outcomes, the teaching requirements. And if there isn't enough of it, what are you going to do about it? And this is what I mean by a plan B. So I could argue that Edinburgh should have a plan B as a risk assessment, because things might go pear-shaped, as they say. So when you look at finances, I think the QA would say, well, if that doesn't work financially, what are you going to do? And it'd be quite nice in your SCR to show that you have considered this, you've thought about it. You may be quite happy with your finances, or you might think there's a bit of a risk, and your SWOT analysis might already, if you have a SWOT for finances, have indicated that there might be a threat to you for finances. So, finances from a QA doesn't look immediately when you read the SOP, but when we go into it, you can see how there are aspects that do need a QA look at. And that's why I'm repeating myself, but you can see how that it's like you in Madrid here, you are dependent on your income. You're not totally automatic, you're not completely independent. You are dependent on a bigger university, so that's what I meant by that. And in which case, again, I'm really repeating what I've said. Right. So that is connected to Standard 11 as 11.1, a policy for QA, and 11.6, learning resources and student support. There is sufficient finance for the 11.6 to do what you are saying, and 11.1, there is a policy obviously for QA in terms of finances. Okay, Standard 3. This is absolutely crucial from a QA perspective. And Standard 3 is the big one. All these different substandards all the way through it that have to be taken into account. So let's just think about some of them, drawing them out from a QA perspective. Number one, a sort of general curriculum in Standard 3, learning outcomes. This is within the program, objectives that you want to achieve as a learning outcome for your students. How do you manage those learning outcomes? Do you have a yearly update to ensure that they're still relevant, that they're adequate? Are you achieving them? All that is pure QA. Absolutely. So again, your SCR would be explaining how and why you do all that, and your documentation, which might be something in the SCR or in the appendix of SCR, annex, or certainly in the base room, and you will refer to it as evidence that you've done those things. So that's a more general look at the curriculum. So 3.4 now, in that one, is the key section from a QA perspective. Just to remind you, if you look again at 3.4, which is quite a long one there, must have a formally constituted committee structure with student representation. I'm not going to read through that one, but that is a really crucial area when it comes to it, involving students, stakeholders, reviewers, external assessors. Review the curriculum at least every 7 years, involving everyone. Training needs for types of staff. So 3.4, do go through it, but that is definitely the one where QA is going to be closely involved with it, and you're going to have to get right. You're going to have to show the easy bet experts that you have done that. If when the visits look at 3.4 at your establishment, and if they feel that you really have not achieved what you should have done, there are problems with 3.4, that means that compliance with Standard 11 has failed, and that is a non-accreditation major problem. Now, let's look at in a bit more detail there what could be a major deficiency when they look at it. Right, insufficient committee structure. That they really haven't got their act together on developing the curriculum and on monitoring the result, the reviews of both It could be students' reviews of courses, student reviews of individual members of staff, exam results. These are all review outcomes on it. And there has to be a structure, a committee structure, both in departments as well as in the whole programme, which has to look at this. Another major deficiency, which is important, as we've said before in ESG 2015, is review. They call it I call it cyclicity. I hate that word. I can't remember where that came from. It came from ESG. So it's a word we wouldn't use normally in English. All it really means is a periodic review, a cycle that you're doing it. So, I mean, ESG 2015, this is really important. They show that you need to regularly review this internally. Externally, are coming to look at you, an easy bet, but internally, you have to have a regular review that you do it. So that's what meant to be cyclicity. Another major deficiency would be little or no evidence of listening to your stakeholders. What about students? Students may have an idea, they may have a complaint, they may have some helpful suggestions. What is the system for students to be listened to within the school? What committee structure listens to them? Is there a staff-student committee? What about the action on a suggestion? You might say, I'm sorry, you're wrong. But it doesn't matter, as long as you've listened to them, and you as a professional opinion, as teachers, will show that actually we understand what you're saying, but we're not going to change. We understand what you're saying, but it's wrong for the following reasons. You've listened to them. That's your decision. They can't run the place, you're running it. But you have to listen to them, and you have to show that you've listened to them. And that's just students. What about outsiders? Do you do graduates? Do you do a regular survey of recent graduates after they're graduated for 2-3 years? Do you send them? A lot of schools do. You send them a document asking, could you review what you did? Is there anything you think, having been through your course recently, that you think we should change? When you're out there in the workplace, do you wish you knew more about, I don't know, rabbit diseases or whatever? There are areas that is a feedback from recent graduates. And I think from a QA perspective, I would try and encourage you, if you don't do already, to try and think about it. It's an easy thing to do, on now with everyone being on email. Easy thing to do, to ask recent graduates. And that is definitely QA. You're listening to them and maybe talking about it and maybe acting on it. And that's just recent graduates. And then, of course, we've got stakeholders. You've got the veterinary profession, the wider profession as well. So lack of input from all these people would be seen as a major deficiency. Another major deficiency would be for all these reviews we're talking about, you've got no information. You haven't got a way of recording it. You haven't got a way of analysing it. Whatever the information gathering you need on review, you can see a huge amount of information. You've got to have a system where it is recorded and analysed, ready for a decision. So that's really a lack of effective evaluation and responding to feedback, which is what I've just mentioned. So I'm giving you some examples there of what really would be seen as a major deficiency. Now, I mentioned this early on this morning. I found that some establishments, the committee, the curriculum committee, in other words, the committee, whatever you call it, it's called different names, but it's the one that has to develop and review the curriculum. Sometimes it's merged with the QA, and the QA is part of it, so on a regular meeting, they will discuss QA. Other places I have noticed have a separate QA committee. Totally separate. Okay, that's all right. However, as I said to you this morning, if that is the case, you have to show evidence, written evidence, that they communicate with each other, because it'll be stupid, it'll be daft, as we would say in English, if you had these two committees and never talk to each other. You can't imagine it, can you, really? So, as I think, again, may have said this morning, I'm repeating myself, but it'll be worth it. You need evidence that the QA committee, or the QA group, has said, look, we should be doing this. And the curriculum committee said, yes, we're listening to you. That's a good idea. Or no, we can't do that because of this. But they've talked to each other. Or the committee would say, you know, we need some better QA on this area. And the QA committee says, yeah, okay, let's try and do something. So there needs to be interrelationship between them if they are separate. It's a bit easier if we're all one committee, or there's quite a big, busy committee on it. Actually, what about your schools? I'm asking you a question now. Would they be separate, or are they integrated?
Yes, they're integrated.
Is what? Separate?
No,
Interrelated, yes. Am I right in Madrid they're separate? Or integrated?
They are in contact, but we are separated.
You have separate meetings, yeah. So that's two examples, isn't it, of how you do it. There's no problem with it. No one's going. EasyVet is not going to say you must do this or you must do that. All they're asking is that if they are separate, you have evidence. That's it. And if they are together, you have evidence in the minutes that they have considered QA side of things. So both are okay, but as I hope I can tell you that you need the evidence from a QA perspective that it's working. Okay. Yeah. Again, this is quite a useful phrase, an English phrase, triangulation. All that means is that there is documents to show that the stakeholders have been listened to, the QA group has considered it, and the curriculum committee. It's all working for the one cause. So again, in your SCR, try and show that this is happening on it. So, if things go smoothly, and you're all doing these things in 3.4 that I've just spoken about, that would be seen in QA terms as an effective PDCA cycle. So be ticking that box firmly. You can see why standard 3 is important. I'm still going through it. So the QA expert during the visit is going to be looking for any evidence that your documentation and your committee structure have suddenly appeared. They weren't there last year, but whoa, look at that. Why we've been visited, we better set up a committee quickly. Please don't try that, because they're not fools, the experts. They will want to know that going back for a few years, you do have some minutes and evidence this has happened. And so that's quite important. I won't name schools, but I can think of one school that I did visit a few years ago where that definitely was the purpose. And these structures had suddenly appeared. And when we met them, they obviously had no clue whatsoever they were doing. They hadn't even met yet. So if you feel that you've got some gaps in the standard 3, be honest about it rather than try and suddenly create a structure. You could say, well, how will they find this the real situation? Well, they're going to find not enough documentation, no evidence of a cyclical reviews. I spelled it wrong the previous time. Yeah, insufficient documentation is there. That will soon be picked up. I think I mentioned this before in your base room, although there's no problem with everything being as you've got it in your own language, but what you must have is a really well-organized list of what is there in English, so that the EasyVet visitors, who, because they won't be coming from Spain, they can't be as